you know, there's something interesting about foreign policy and the way people say things. The very point of an individual saying something, let's say I open my mouth about a particular thing, I come out with a particular opinion, that opinion, yes, may hit something that I'm talking about, but it also gives you a window into me. Meaning, the thing that I am talking about doesn't just say something about the thing that I'm talking about. I can be right, wrong, somewhere in between, but it also gives you some perspective on me and what is going on in my head and what I am thinking about. And it is the weirdest thing in the world to have this engagement with neocons, because they look at the world in a very particular, in a very weird way that does not line up in large part with reality, but is based entirely in their own ideology. There's an article that came out in the Washington Post. This. Right here. Did we underestimate Russia's vaccine? This article is phenomenally ridiculous. And it gets into the problems, honestly, with this American perspective, or this perspective of this us versus them duality, where you can't even understand and realize that the point of the Sputnik V vaccine was to be a vaccine. Period. Period. Whatever it did after that was bonus. But from their standpoint, they are cheering for that vaccine to fail. Did we underestimate Russia's vaccine? First, who the fuck are we? Who are we? Who are we? I didn't underestimate the vaccine. I had no belief at all that the Russian government would make the decision to inject random shit into people. No. If it was a vaccine, I suspected the vaccine was going to work. And the reason that they don't like this is because they consider it a win. Russia gets a win. There's a soft power win for Vladimir Putin, Russia, because the Sputnik V vaccine does what it's supposed to do and does it prodigiously well. Not just does what it's supposed to do, but has gotten his bona fides from Lancet, is being sold all around the world, in Iran and many of these other countries, and cheaper than the versions that are coming out of the West. Just as effective, if not more so, cheaper. That means it's a better product on some level. Each of the vaccines that are being produced, of course, seem to work better or worse depending upon the variant that those things are being up against. But the Russian vaccine has done extraordinarily well. Sputnik V. Moonshot, right? Or not the moonshot, but sitting it up into space. Yes, if you want to call that a soft power win, you can call that a soft power win. But again, I'm trying to make the point that from that neocon's perspective, that's what they're focusing on. From the Russian perspective, from my own perspective, what I am focusing on is the vaccine and that vaccine working. It is not there to be a tool of foreign policy. It is there to do the job of inoculating the citizens of the country from COVID. How weird and warped is the perspective of an individual or of a group that would look at a vaccine and say that that is some kind of foreign policy issue. And even though they wouldn't go as far as saying, God, we hope that thing failed, you can almost read between the lines in hoping that they were hoping it failed, that they did not want it to work, that they did not want that vaccine to be a success. They were rooting for COVID. They were rooting for COVID. Think about that shit. They were rooting for the vaccine because they couldn't even see the humanity in the Russians, that maybe it is important to get the vaccine. Maybe it is good that that vaccine works. Maybe it is good that you have another country that can spread the vaccine around to help with the doses that you require to get those people inoculate. It's a positive thing, except for neocons. Throughout the article, he points out how great the vaccine is, how cheaper it is, how many of the other countries around the world have decided to use it, including Europe and the EU. And he bemoans the fact that this is a win. The thing is, and this was something that we said a while ago, or I said a while ago, for the Russian government to be able to create a vaccine, put that vaccine out, have the vaccine work, disperse it successfully, shows competence. I don't have to look at it and say it's competent. From a cosmic level, just from the experiential action itself, scientifically creating it, mass producing it, putting out there, all of those things were successes. And yes, all of those things are the epitome of competence. If you want to call that a soft power win, call it a soft power win. It's just a display of competence. In comparison to the United States, where you have nearly 500,000 people that died of a particular virus, and you had bungled rollouts in regards to getting out the vaccine, that does not show competence. That shows the opposite of that. That shows incompetence. And that goes to 500,000 people dead. 3,000 people or more died in 9/11. And over the past several months, almost for the point of a year, we've had that many people dying nearly every day because of the incompetence from the United States government. That doesn't even get to what was taken from the standpoint of retail and the way that we allow retail to get kicked in the teeth. We allow billionaires to get nearly $1 trillion at the expense of a portion of the society that we basically let fall off of a fucking cliff. Those things are not items of competence. They're just not. They're experiential failures. Now, we can have this foreign policy conversation if you want. But the reality of it is, looking at the vaccine and looking at that as somewhat as a negative, it's disturbing to me. It's utterly and entirely disturbing. I didn't underestimate the virus or their vaccine. I don't know who the we is that was in that room that had this kind of xenophobic idea that the Russians weren't competent enough to do it. Whether you realize it or not, they've been eating your lunch or our lunch for months, going all the way back to Obama. Think back for a moment. Think back. The United States goes into Iraq, gets 1 million people killed. Again, that is not a show of competence. That is a show of might, yes. But just because a person is strong and beat another person up, that doesn't really show anything. That doesn't really prove anything. If you have $1 trillion that you're spending on the military, yes, I'm sure you can kill a lot of people and blow up a podunk country. That's what you did. That was not a show of competence. Obama going into multiple countries, killing all the way through, starting a civil war in Syria that he could not win. 500,000 people dead. That doesn't even talk about Gaddafi in the way that the United States got involved, getting Gaddafi murdered, not to mention they're selling slaves as a result of U.S. and Western action. Again, not a show of competence. None of those things are indicative of competence. All of those things were indicative of savagery, not competence. Obama wants to bomb Syria because of chemical weapons. Red line, red line. Vladimir Putin comes in and says, hey, I'll take these off of them and we'll make sure that the chemical weapons go away. Obama takes him up on that because he didn't necessarily want to have that fight. Putin steps in for a soft power win. He becomes a statesman. Sergei Lavrov, statesman. And, I'm not saying this because I work for the channel. I'm saying this because it's just legit. Everything that I've just said is absolutely accurate. From the standpoint of them taking that right there, that was a win. That showed competence. That showed an ability for a state to engage with other states to find a solution outside of war. That is competence. That is experiential competence from a nation state point of view. What about the other issue, let's say with the weapons? You have various missile systems that were being sold. Turkey decides to buy the Russian missile systems. Other countries decide to buy the Russian systems. Why? Because the Russian system did everything that the American system did and was cheaper and didn't have the entanglements associated with the American system. So some of the other countries basically started to buy them, and America got pissed off that those other countries were buying the Russian weapon system. And as people told them, the system is just better and cheaper. Better and cheaper. So they buy it. Again, competence. Experiential competence. They didn't have to go through and browbeat countries to say, buy my product. They didn't have to push or cajole and say, hey, don't buy that other stuff. They didn't have to do that. The product spoke for itself. And yeah, this. I'm making the point that this is not just the Sputnik V vaccine. It has been competence that has been showed over the course of the years. The United States is engaging with Russia as if Stalin is still in charge of Russia. Vladimir Putin is a capitalist. And, you could say that there's a certain history and everything else with the country. Yes, but I got to be honest, a lot of this antagonism is full of conspiracy theories. States and nations, yes, they fight each other. They compete against one another. They do underhanded things for one another or towards one another. Those are the way countries engage. It is problematic when people act as if one country is doing something that their country is not, and come up with these kind of reasons and justifications to be mad and pissed off at shit that doesn't really exist. But look, right here, I want to show this part. This is a part of the article. Right now, Sputnik V, named after the world's first satellite that saw Soviets initially outpace Americans in space, is starting to look like it could be a global success story. It got boosted last week after the respected British medical journal The Lancet published a peer-reviewed paper that found the vaccine had 91% efficacy 21 days after the first shot and 91.8% for those over 60 years old, placing it on par with the celebrated Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna vaccines. They were cheaper and just as good. More than a dozen other countries have approved the vaccine for use, with more likely to follow that it has received the Lancet seal of approval. Sputnik V is considered cheaper than the Western competitors, does not require the same sort of ultra-cold storage infrastructure that would complicate distribution of Pfizer vaccine in much of the developing world. It is a cheaper, it is a better, and it is an easily more storable vaccine. It is a better product. It's a better product. Say what the fuck you want. It's a better product, right? Yeah, the other vaccines are difficult because they have cold storage issues, meaning if you need to send those things, let's say, into some poorer countries, you may not be able to work. Yes, you can send those in the United States because you can find cold storage places and everything else. If you're in other countries, maybe not. The Sputnik V vaccine works. And this guy begrudgingly says so. And it could amount, this is the point right here, and it could amount to a soft power victory, a rare soft power victory for the Kremlin. Now, I just made the point about multiple other cases that Russia has basically shown itself to either be a statesman, shown itself a certain degree of competence in regards to political affairs and into technology and weaponry and so forth. And yeah, this, medical science, it's not a rare win. And the we that you're talking about is just the United States and Western countries. The point of view that he's trying to pretend as if everybody has, that really evolves with him and the people who are putting these types of point of view out, doesn't necessarily apply if you're in China, if you're in Iran, if you're in any other country other than the United States or areas of the West. He's talking to a closed room. And yes, I understand in this kind of echo chamber where reporters and everything else take this American perspective and they just kind of say we, as if everybody agrees with it. Just understand, it's a small we that he is talking about. And it's usually that we on this end of the world, per se, that is not indicative of the rest of the world. The United States is 5% of the world's population. I'm not quite sure what that number goes to with Europe, but I guarantee you it's not going to be the majority of the world. The majority of the world doesn't think this way, just the West. That's the point I'm trying to make. On multiple continents, government have turned administering Sputnik V. This week, Iran began inoculating healthcare workers with Russian vaccine ahead of the broader push towards immunization in a country weakened by economic sanctions and home to the pandemic's worst outbreak in the Middle East. Yeah, the sanctions that the United States was putting on crippled that country and crippled their ability to get healthcare and medical care and everything else. That was savage. The article should explain it that way, that it was U.S. sanctions that made the determination to make all of those people, or basically increase the level of death in Iran. The paper's not going to say it that way. That is literally what took place. If it wasn't for the Sputnik V vaccine, would Iran have been getting immunized? The answer is probably no. So understand, it's not just a win for Russia. It's a win for all of those other places that were not going to be able to get their hands on that vaccine because of issues of the United States, either in regards to the foreign policy of sanctions, or for that matter, the weakening of the countries in regards to their capacity to use those things or get those things, or even cold storage. If they had to go into Syria, would there be cold storage appropriate or left in Syria in order to do that with all of the wars and everything else that took place based on the U.S. provocation? This vaccine is a lifesaver for billions that would not be able to get their hands on the richer vaccines. So this nonsense that, this is going to be a soft power win for Russia. It's not just a soft power win for Russia. It's also a medical and scientific win for all of those people around the world that wouldn't be able to afford those other vaccines. How warped are you to even make this argument, to make this piece, to write this piece? It's so fucking warped. Then they end up with lunatic Garry Kasparov. And lunatic Garry Kasparov, who lost to a computer and flipped the fuck out after he lost to a computer, a world champion at one point, very strong chess player, but again, lost to a computer and whimpered and bitched about it. He has comments at the end that basically is saying the EU shouldn't give Putin any wins. Right here. Kremlin critic wants Joe Biden and his allies in Europe to take a firm line against Russia. At the very least, they should stop giving Putin and other authoritarian regimes leverage and legitimacy with trade deals, memberships, and access, exiled dissident and failed chess player Garry Kasparov wrote in the Washington Post piece. Look, we don't care about dictators. I'm not saying Putin is a dictator. I'm just saying, in general, we don't care about dictators. We don't care about working with the dictators in Saudi Arabia. We didn't care about working with the strong man from the standpoint of Erdogan, or for that matter, the other Middle Eastern monarchs that are basically propped up by weapons and whatnot. We don't care about working with dictators. We never cared about working with dictators. We only cared that those dictators were able to keep that public in line, to get those resources that we and our corporations wanted. And it is far easier to deal with a dictator as opposed to dealing with a democracy or a republic that may tell you to go fuck yourself. That's the honest to God truth. Go back and look at the Tillerson memo. It's very clear. You go against countries that are our friends, or you back up countries that are our friends. You go against countries that are our enemies, and you use human rights as a cudgel to do so. So you hit China, you hit Iran, and you hit Syria with issues of human rights. You don't say shit about Turkey until it does something weird, and you keep Saudi Arabia and all that other stuff out of your mouth. That's the honest truth about American politics. For Garry Kasparov, he also knows that. It doesn't stop him at all for talking about authoritarian regimes as if the United States is against them. We're against those ones that don't follow our lead. We're for those ones that do. That is the only distinction in regards to geopolitics. Garry Kasparov will fuck himself on this very particular point. Human rights is a big issue and it's something that I agree with across the board, regardless of whether the people are. But I also am very clear that some of the things that these guys are doing are fucking warhawks and neocons. And their arguments here has this veil of, fuck, the vaccine worked. And that's deplorable and utterly, honestly, from a humanity standpoint, rigorously appalling. Like, share, and subscribe.